So, to welcome everyone to the 6th BCPC Pests and Beneficials Review. I'm the chair of the current chair of the Expert Working Group on Pests and Beneficials. And I just want to say thank you to you all for joining us this morning. And thank you to our speakers and chair for taking the time to prepare presentations and to be involved in discussion panels. The BC Pests and Beneficials Group has members from across various different sectors, and you can see a full list of current members on the BCPC website. And the purpose of the group is to provide a forum for discussion of relevant research results and new legislation and their impacts on integrated pest management. And you can read a bit more about what we do on the website as well, and you can also access previous reviews for previous years. Also like to thank our sponsors, HDB, ADAS, Bayer, Corteva, Certis, Ferret and Syngenta. And you can see at the bottom of the screen that we also have a hashtag for Twitter. So if you want to tweet about this during the day, we'd encourage you to do so. That would be great. Raise awareness of the issues and what we're discussing. So I'll just introduce our chair now. So Neal Evans, who is the Director of Operations at the Voluntary Initiative, has very kindly agreed to chair this review for us. Neal has a PhD in agriculture from the University of Glasgow, and prior to his current position, Neal was the European Research Lead at Weather Innovations Incorporated, providing weather-based modelling and monitoring systems for use at farm level. Before that, Neal was at Rothamsted Research developing disease forecasting systems for OSR, and he's also worked on the control of foliar leaf diseases in pistachio in California. So I'll hand over to Neal now to introduce our programme for the day.
Okay, so anyway, I just thought I'd take a few minutes just to introduce you to the Voluntary Initiative and what we are and how we've come about, and to explain why IPM is intrinsically important to us as an organisation, and then to look at IPM in the wider context of this meeting. So next slide, please, Julie. So, what is the Voluntary Initiative? We came about in 2001 when the Blair government suggested that there was an pesticide tax, or at least legislation, should be introduced. And the Voluntary Initiative was basically a response from industry to self-fund and self-regulate to appropriate the safe and appropriate use of pesticides. So there was the Voluntary Initiative on pesticide use, as its original name was, which looks after agriculture, and obviously the Amenity Forum was developed to look after the amenity sector. And these are the 8 sponsors who are involved in funding our work. Next slide, please, Julie. So what does the VI actually do? Well, both the Voluntary Initiative and the Amenity Forum are integral to the implementation of the Sustainable Use Directive, and through the introduction and adoption of the National Action Plan back in 2013. And the VI developed 3 main programmes within this body of work. That's the development of the National Register of Spray Operators, National Spray Testing Scheme, and the introduction of IPM plans. Next slide, please. Oh, that's skipped 2, I think. Okay, so NROSO, National Register of Spray Operators, currently has 21,600 odd members, and is basically an organisation that encourages continual personal development, and all of the members have to collect a minimum of 30 points over a 3-year period. And a lot of them do that through attending the annual training event, which is normally delivered by about 200 odd trainers across the UK in face-to-face meetings. But we've literally, this year, as you can imagine, we've had to move to an online service, which only opened on the 14th of January, and we've already had 804 people complete the arable course and 100 people complete the fruit course. And Larissa asked me to remind you that if you are a NROSO member or a BASIS member, you can collect 4 points for attending this meeting. Next slide. The National Spray Testing Scheme is a really useful scheme because it encourages, people to get their equipment tested on a regular basis, and it's actually legislated now. If you are in red tractor or an assurance scheme, much like a car MOT, the equipment needs to be tested every year. If you're not in an insurance scheme, it's every 3. And an interesting off-spin of this is that the UK second-hand spray equipment is much sought after across Europe and commands a higher price because, you know, the industry understands that all our sprayers are kept to high standard. Next slide, please, Jean. And the third pillar was the introduction of the Ipm Plan. And this was a checklist of best practice compliance, which was introduced in 2015, and 17,000 farm organisations actually completed it. Again, if you're in red tractor or another assurance scheme, it's a requirement to complete this annually. We've recently changed the IPM plan actually. Henry Creason, who's a scientist working at SRUC with Fiona Burnett and others, published a paper in 2019. If you click on the mouse, Julian, and basically they looked at placing a metric behind IPM that growers could complete a questionnaire and they would get a score of how well their adoption of IPM was going. So we use this, the paper was published in Pest Management Science, as you can see at the bottom there, with the brilliant title of Measuring the Unmeasurable. And we used this paper and developed over the last 8 months or so, 3 new plans. The arable plan, which was launched back in December, a grassland plan that was launched about 2 weeks ago, and we have a horticulture plan which is in development. And it's important that, you know, Henry's work showed the importance of peer-to-peer learning. For example, adoption of IPM was much more likely if farmers were part of a farming discussion group. And I just wanted to highlight one of the newer initiatives that we've developed. Next slide, please, Julian. Around the same time that Henry's paper was published, we had similar thoughts and recognized, you know, peer-to-peer learning was the way to drive uptake of IPM at the farm gate. So we developed our IPM champions. And these are freely available to the industry to attend meetings and speak peer-to-peer, face-to-face with other farmers. And if you would like some more information, then please email me and we could send you some information. Okay, next slide, please, Julian. So I just wanted to show that integrated pest management is really central to all of the VI's best practice messages and current schemes. But we must remember that IPM is loaded with inherent risk. You know, that decision to not spray for aphids on seed potatoes could critically, you know, cause the loss of the complete crop. So we're hoping that through the Sustainable Farming Initiative and ELMS, that this inherent IPM risk will be underpinned and rewarded. And this BCPC Pests and Beneficials review is very timely. I'm sure many of you are aware that there's currently an ongoing consultation looking at the revised National Action Plan. And I'd just like to sort of dip into this in a couple of areas and just pull out some observations that you might want to mull over and consider. And perhaps we could discuss these later in the day. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to look at definitions. And basically this is a copy of the National Action Plan consultation, as you can see. And the top one is the definition that is written into the revised National Action Plan. And, you know, as you can see here, this is what you might expect in terms of it's instructive in terms of targeted use of pesticides, importance of crop health and environmental protection. But if you consider the original definition as defined by the Sustainable Use Directive, you can see here highlighted in green that, you know, the word economically is in there. So interventions should be done to levels that are economically and ecologically justified. And this is really important because in the rush to implement IPM, it's often overlooked, I think, that farms are businesses and there is a need to make a profit. Next slide, please. And as our sponsors at NFU continue to tell us, you know, farmers cannot be green if they are farming in the red. You know, coming back to this definitions, one of the talks you'll hear later this morning also has another definition of IPM from the FAO, which again is slightly different. So this is something for us to consider. Next slide, please. I just wanted to look at the definitions of messaging as well. You know, we're all fairly aware, I think, of the 8 principles of IPM as set out by the Framework Directive. Next click, please, Julian. But in the revised National Action Plan, we see that these have now been compressed into a 5-tier pyramid system. And, you know, there's a few questions about this. There seems to be an increased importance for thresholds, for example, as you can see in the middle there, and the need to surpass a threshold before an intervention is considered. And for insect pests, for you guys who are doing better than most of us on this, you know, you're not doing too badly, but for diseases and weeds especially, the science on thresholds is still not really resolved. Secondly, the economic issue rears its head again. As you can see, in terms of physical or mechanical interventions, physical weeding might be economically viable in a row crop, but hand roguing a 60-hectare field of wheat is not. Biologicals may be appropriate in a protected horticultural situation, but we currently don't have the arsenal of beneficial of biologicals for large field scale production and pest problems. So I believe there's room for refinement here. For example, there's no mention of the importance of education and training through BASIS to help train the decision maker. Next click, please, Julian. And then we are working with others in the industry to see if the message can be simplified further. And I'm sure that some of you will attend the HDB IPM workshop next Friday to continue discussion in this area. The consultation closes on the 26th of February, and I encourage you or your organisation to consider submitting a response. And, you know, so I'd just like to try and consider some of these economic and regulatory barriers as we go through the day. And so we've got some really interesting talks. I'd really encourage you to tweet if you're into Twitter, and also to ask some lovely questions using the Q&A button as described by Larissa.